Good morning, everyone. Afternoon, depending on where you're at. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Jeff Simpkins. I'm part of the Cloud Secure Edge team here at SonicWall. With me, I have Wayson, who's a member of our executive team here. Wayson, do you mind just giving a quick snapshot of your experience and your role with SonicWall?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Fourth time for hopefully a lot of us. And so I lead IT and security here at SonicWall. Just been here just under a year. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I guess it makes the most sense here to kind of start with a simple observation because there's a theme to this episode. The network is no longer a place. It's an experience. Your users aren't sitting behind a firewall in a single building anymore. They're working from home, airports, coffee shops. Your applications aren't sitting neatly in a data center. They're SaaS platform, public cloud workloads, private cloud environments. Sometimes people are still on-prem. Data, it's moving constantly. And we've talked about a lot of that on the previous episode. But here's the challenge we're going to try to touch on today. While everything has become distributed, security often hasn't kept up. Many organizations are still trying to bolt on modern cloud usage onto legacy security architectures, and really that creates friction for users, friction at times for IT, and ultimately risk for the business. So with Cloud Secure Edge, we're trying to change that model. Instead of backhauling traffic through centralized hardware, instead of relying on perimeter-based assumptions, instead of trusting first and inspecting later, CSE, we're trying to deliver security as close as possible to the user, the device, the application, combining zero trust network access, secure web gateway, cloud access security broker capabilities, sometimes firewall controls, really delivered from the cloud. So providing consistent policy enforcement, deep visibility, seamless user experience without sacrificing that performance element. So because, the reality, security that interrupts productivity, I'm sure Wayson can speak to this, and I certainly have some of these examples being on the sales end of SonicWall, eventually get bypassed. But security that's built into the fabric of how people work, that can become an enabler. So we're going to explore today kind of how Cloud Secure Edge modernizes security architecture, reduces the complexity for folks like Wayson, and really protects organizations without slowing them down. Leading into a question for Wayson here, most cybersecurity incidents, they don't begin with some master hacker plot. They usually start with very ordinary human mistakes. People are generally the weakest link when it comes to security. Technology can be locked down fairly tight, but people are naturally busy. They're trusting, they're trying to be helpful, they're under pressure. And as the world of security has evolved, we've seen attackers sort of design their tactics to take advantage of normal human behavior, not to be super secure systems. So if we can hone in on one of those common occurrences, and there are many, like let's take phishing, for example. An employee falls for a phishing email and types their password into a fake login page, arguably the most common of these occurrences. That can lead to unauthorized access to companies' environments, which can lead to a host of problems. Wayson, as I've worked with IT directors and security practitioners over the years, it seems that the human element is kind of seen as a wild card. As you're looking at the human element and when building out a security stack, what are some considerations you make when designing a security policy for an organization?
Yeah, I always look at it as to me, it's narrowing their window, right? So how do you contain them, put some guardrails up for them, and I think one of the things I would encourage folks, or I think about, is like you just not to make assumptions around users too, right? So to me, you should really understand your user base, what they're using, why they're using it. I stress why a lot with my teams. Like we have to really understand what folks are, why are they needing certain things. So not making any assumptions there. And I think about like when in the past, SSL VPN and certainly those types of solutions, and you just kind of gave everyone the same access, and you made sure it was locked down and you felt good, it was protected. But things change, right? Businesses change, environments change. The threat actors, they're more complicated, they're relentless. So you have to really, so I look at really going back to like saying narrowing their window. And so this is where I love zero trust and some of the solutions along with that. And so, it's certainly the idea and your approach are like, okay, how do I better protect my environment? Right? So least privilege, how do I minimize this, based on whatever roles people are in, continuously verifying the user, the device. Everything is challenged essentially. How do you continuously monitor, right? And logging and understanding, right? So you're looking at what people do in their roles, and you're monitoring that, and the authentication behind that, right? And so, to me, when I talk narrow, it's moving from getting away from just trust in the past, where now you're verifying, right? Regardless, you're in there, user to the device itself, you're continuously trying to prove, no implicit access, things like that. So you're going from kind of this expansive access. You had access to everything once you got in. Now you're trying to restrict that window again, kind of going back to really going to narrowing that window for your users. Unfortunately, they are kind of like you mentioned at the top of it, right? The weakest link here at times. And so you kind of want to get away from the static kind of approach, being more adaptive and more dynamic in terms of how you can sense risk signals, things like that. So really that's what I think of when is just, that's the challenge with, the human side of this. And look, everybody's busy. Everyone's got a lot of things going on. And so we need to help folks. Right. And so to me, that's what I look at.
Yeah, and it's funny because, being on the customer facing side of CSE, it doesn't really matter the size of the organization or what role an individual holds. It seems that they all share the same problems in some way or another. They might be protecting source code. They might be doing something different. They might be protecting financial records or PII. But that's a neutral for Cloud Secure Edge. Tying a user to the risk. That's something that most of our customers have in common. Trusting but always verifying access. And through CSE, when we deploy that agent to an endpoint, we're tying that user's device to the credentials they hold inside the organization. That way, it's not enough to have an employee's username and password. We can refine access, like you mentioned, but a username and password doesn't necessarily give them the keys to the kingdom, as you put it.
No.
So that kind of segues into the next point here. And, and friction creates risk. So I think it might be helpful here to define what I mean by friction here. In cybersecurity, friction, the way that I see it, and please correct me, is it means anything that makes security harder, slower, annoying for the end user, or inconvenient for people to do. And when friction is too high, people naturally find workarounds, right? And those workarounds can create risk. And the basic idea here is that, friction can really change human behavior. Most breaches don't happen because people want to break rules. They happen because security may be getting in the way of getting work done. And like you mentioned on the previous slide, and like we did on the previous slide, I'll kind of hone in on device friction here. At times people may be more comfortable using their own devices without understanding the risk that presents to an organization. They'll find ways to bypass security controls. They'll use personal websites, laptops on unsecured devices and access secure material, or find just unofficial ways to bypass restrictions. Seeing as, Cloud Secure Edge can mitigate these risks by validating users' credentials and their context of what they're trying to access, their posture, their location, and sort of refine that access, like you mentioned. Are there some sections of an organization that you generally deem higher risk? Is it solely individuals who are accessing PII? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think first off, you look at trying to understand, where within your organization your critical applications, where's your crown jewels and things like that, and then who's working on them. And so the first thing that, one of the first things that jumps out is certainly finance and accounting. I look at, and they have access to the data, they have to our finances, they have access to payments. And so, so I look at that. And so to me, finance and accounting jumps out in terms of what they do on a daily basis. So that's one thing we look at and certainly segment them off. My last couple of this role and my last couple of companies I've worked for, it's been engineering. There's been an engineering team, a software engineering team, and that creates software products or hardware products, and that's our intellectual property. And so you have that to be concerned with. I mentioned intellectual property, but on the same token, if you've worked with software engineers, they're great. They're creative. They create these solutions for us, but they oftentimes are out there actually trying different things, and whether it's internal or external, using these tools and some open source stuff maybe, and I'm guessing a lot of folks on the call today, you've been in IT a long time, shadow IT, they start using these things you're not aware of. So so I always kind of look at that group too as, okay, how do we certainly want to enable them, but at the same token, like, hey, what are we doing there, right? So you want to make sure you're protecting that, and again, the intellectual property, right? For some companies, that code is it, right? And then I looked at, honestly, in the past, I didn't really think much about it, but in the last couple of years, the other group that's kind of really jumped up is like support, our technical support, and even like internal help desk. There's plenty of cyber examples now where companies, someone's called in and fooled your support desk thinking that, that this was an employee, and now I have, can you reset my password? And next thing bad stuff happens. So I look at, immediately kind of those things jump out at me as kind of like, okay, how are we treating them, and how are we, let's go protect them. And I would say to folks like in IT, like for years, we've had X accounts, right? Your admin accounts, things like that. So it's the same thing, in the past, we've kind of had special access to certain things. And so it's the same concept. You're just trying to, you're really jumping down and narrowing that down.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The ability to evaluate the condition of a user's endpoint, who they are, what they're accessing, what security controls are present, can alleviate some of that friction. But most importantly, to your point, and looking at high-risk users, we allow the security team, individuals like yourself, to bucket these users who would be deemed higher risk into different categories, and really permit or restrict access based on whether they satisfy whatever the security requirements of those organizations are. One way that we can just kind of streamline that focus, and like you put it earlier, get a little bit more granular on the context of that user and what they're accessing. And I really think that kind of brings us full circle here a little bit. I think it's safe to say the ultimate goal should be finding ways to protect an organization's environment without interrupting the day-to-day of their employees, and or frustrating the the end users to the point where they try to circumvent the policies that we have in place. And the question, how can we ensure that employees are able to do their job in a quick and concise manner without making their job more difficult or tedious? And the hope here is that we're kind of shining some lights on a real live example here with Wayson, who does this for a long time now, but also how we're kind of using Cloud Secure Edge to sort of align to what naturally industry leaders are doing. So bucketing those employees who have access to critical sections of the environment, who are accessing source code or PII. But on the flip side, individuals like myself, we can streamline access to individuals who are trying to access sections of the environment that we may not deem high risk, that are customer facing, but are still an integral part of the individual's day to day. So
yeah, no, definitely, right. Even on like what you just said earlier, I know we talked about on our previous webinars, but just the access, your threat score, right, that CSC has, and so you have that employee that wants to remove something off of their laptop or workstation, or they don't do the updates, or something happens there, and so your trust score goes down and you don't get access, right? So I love that CSC offers that, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. Make it simple and make it effective.
Exactly.
So another question here for you, Wayson. In your role as a chief information officer with SonicWall, whereas security is a priority, right? It's a priority for anybody in your position. Obviously, you have other initiatives as well that stem beyond security. You have a broad role as being a member of the executive team. So how has the ability to define access controls and kind of going back to what we just discussed and evaluate a user's posture prior to granting access to the environment improved efficiency? Has it had any impact on cost as well, like with FTEs and freeing up the team's time?
Yeah, I think certainly in when I think efficiency standpoint in how you set up a CSE compared to what you do in kind of your traditional VPN environment, I think the setup's a lot easier, and how you do your policies. A lot of it is kind of a one-stop shop once you kind of understand how you want to separate things. So I do think there's some efficiencies there, and maybe you already have some of that set up, but as you start going down the path of really locking things down, and maybe you want to separate roles like finance or things like that, there's a lot of work that you have to do and kind of set up within the VPN side. So it's a little easier in CSE. So you have some of that. There's your kind of your policy administration from an efficiency standpoint. We've seen large customers of ours who have adopted CSE, who's less tickets now. It's a lot more stable. It's a lot more. It's less finicky in some respects. And so what that ultimately boils down is your TCO, your as an IT person, your TCO is much better, right? Because you're just not working on kind of these ongoing things, or it's easier to be kind of your one-stop shop. And think about the amount of other things you're getting with CSE, like third-party protection, as an example. A lot of that becomes easier to maintain, and so your total cost of ownership, definitely improves there. To some degree, even for the users itself, it's actually it can be a reduction there. So we definitely see that, definitely, and our customers have shared with us that they see it too.
That's great. Yeah. So two-parter here for you, going right into another question. Zero trust being a huge buzzword in security right now. It's being circulated by the industry for probably 5 or 6 years now, heavily. And we see, at least from my perspective, because I work with our customers and our partners on a fairly regular basis, we see organizations kind of adopting their own flavors, kind of looking at the framework and trying to pick and pull pieces of the framework that might be relevant to whatever industry they're in or whatever their security policy is. So are there any key elements of zero trust that are non-negotiable for you?
The whole thing is non-negotiable. That's how I think about it. Look, there's certainly, we're here to talk about the CSE and what we do in our product. So there's a technical component, but look, our employees, these are our teammates. We got to protect them, right? And so zero trust to me, the whole thing is it. And last time I think I did a little quick soapbox. I'll stay away from that. But the whole thing is not negotiable to me.
Yeah, that's great to hear. We see teams adopting pieces of it, but really zero trust at its core, the framework kind of stipulates that, hey, look, you embrace this framework, not necessarily in its entirety in order to produce an output. And really, that's where we're trying to go with Cloud Secure Edge is try to help people on their journey to zero trust. And a lot of times that can be daunting for, organizations that may not have fully staffed security teams, and they may be using IT as an arm of it. But, I've been working in spaces and places outside of SonicWall where this can be a complicated conversation, but Cloud Secure Edge can simplify it based on where they're at in their journey. And really, we do it with one unified platform. We're trying to reduce OpEx. We're improving manageability. We're reducing tool bloat. A lot of our competitors can piecemeal together 3 or 4 different solutions to accomplish what we're doing with CSE. A lot of times that's several different renewals to manage. That's different subject matter experts, different management platforms. And really, we're trying to simplify the deployment process with CSE, make it easy for those IT and those security teams to get this out to the user base. We're a simple agent deployment. We're not doing anything super high tech here. Once that agent is there, we're doing a few things. We're validating the credentials of that individual and that time of access. But we're also looking at the posture, like you said, Wayson. Are they in line with our expectations from an IT or a security team? Do they have device encryption turned on? Are they using a specific program we require? Is their operating system up to date? Are they utilizing our form of endpoint detection response? Geolocations. All of this happens through that agent. Really by configuring Cloud Secure Edge in a manner that's congruent with an existing security policy. We're not trying to change the way a company's doing something.
Sure. Yep.
So I'm going to I know we got less than 10 minutes here, and I want to leave some time for questions here, Wayson, but I wanted to open something up because when I speak to security leaders or even IT leaders, something that is ever present, and I wanted to open this up to your thoughts for the folks that are listening in. Your peers may find themselves at some point trying to, when you're talking to a CISO, it seems one of the most difficult tasks, or excuse me, when you're talking to the board as a CISO, one of the most difficult tasks is illustrating risk to internal stakeholders who may not have your technical background, who may not understand the risk from the perspective you do. How do you go about selling this idea of zero trust or cloud secure edge or this framework that we're discussing today internally?
Yeah, I think for me, it would, certainly what I would advise folks is, I think it's, you have to look at it for, especially if you're working with you're a financial decision maker, or you're, you're trying to get this through folks who are maybe not in this technical space, or excuse me, security space, or they're not aware of it. You need to use facts. You need to use relevant data. And so it goes a long ways to start explaining where you're still relevant, your perimeter, but the focus has changed to identification and protection. There's plenty of it's plenty of examples in terms of non-business examples around what people see today in terms of certainly getting your identity stolen and things like that. But bring it within the business itself, and especially if you're hybrid or if you're fully remote, you want to bring that back in. And when I say using facts, right, there is no doubt there's so many examples out there of last year in terms, excuse me, of companies getting attacked, a lot of companies getting their SSL VPN attacked. It didn't make a difference what size vendor you were, small, medium, large, everybody was under attack. In addition, think about some of the large, and I'll just say gargantuan companies that had difficulties in the SaaS space, right? Those large companies last year, and I'll stay away from naming names, but there were some pretty big companies that got breached, so you take those and you need to make sure you're showing those facts to your leaders. Couple that again, if you're hybrid remote, your employees likely go to Microsoft or Google, whatever your email and wherever your data is stored. Maybe it's on OneDrive. You never hit VPN. You never come back to the company, right? And so all of that, there's a mystery there, somewhat of a mystery there, right? And so lay those facts out, and then talk to them about this zero trust journey. Previous episodes, we talked about it is not just about identity. It is about your applications, your network, the devices, the data. All of that can be separated, can be controlled. So go back and regain that back, right? And explain that to them. We obviously need to be concise, but I think use those facts, use that. And then lastly, I gotta believe there's a lot of folks out there just like me. You're constantly under pressure to do more with less. Well, here you have a tool in CSC that not only gives you the same VPN benefits you want and need today, you get additional security and blocking and things like that, and from malicious content. Jeff mentioned it earlier, right? Geo filtering, all those things. You get that all in one, and then you take, which to me is another big spot, that third-party apps. You likely don't have a solution that stops anything from there, or is any, there's limited awareness, I'll say, right? But regain that back in that story, sell that, so you can reduce your blast radius is what you're ultimately doing here. And then, lastly, also making them aware, I think, of what often gets lost. It's not really anyone's pillar in zero trust, but end user awareness, right? Never trust, always verify. That applies to employees looking at email phishing. I mentioned support earlier. You get a phishing call. You want people to never trust, always verify that. If accountants is being asked to make payments to the CEO, you stop and never trust, always verify. So I think coupling those stories together and showing those real examples, that's at your doorstep. It's not somewhere that's far away. That all of us are under pressure, right? So I think use your facts, bring in how these solutions that can do more for you, and cover a lot of these bases. So that, to me, you're showing those leaders there that you are advancing your security program, and you're really stiffening your security posture in the end, and that goes a long way, right? And so use your facts and lay that stuff out for them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Wayson. Folks, we're coming up on time here, but I do want to give a few tidbits of information here before and if you have questions at this point while I'm going over this piece, feel free to ask. If you have questions about CSE or of Wayson, feel free at this point. But the natural evolution here is that we have a team of folks at SonicWall that are ready to support a customer or a partner on their journey with this, and whether you're engaged with existing territory managers that you have relationships with at SonicWall who you've been working with for firewalls over the last 20, 30 years, reach out to them about Cloud Secure Edge. In addition, my information is going to be attached to this. This is all I do over here is Cloud Secure Edge. So I'm happy to help in that capacity as well. We have a team that's ready for you. So we have trials inside my SonicWall that you could prompt. In addition, if you just want a Q&A and you want to see how this will fit inside your environment, I'm always happy to hop on a 30 to 60 minute phone call and give a technical demonstration or ask whatever generic questions you have of me. We're here to help.